In this lesson, we're going to have a look at another method of selecting a sample called a stratified random sample. Now, this concept of stratified comes from the idea of making sure you've got a fair selection of people from the population size. Let's have a look at the notes. It says, when we select a random sample of 10 students from a mixed class of 30, so this is a random sample and it's mixed boys and girls, it is possible that you could get 10 boys. Now, if that happened, that would not be a fair sample. So if it is important for our purpose that we have what we call a proportional mix of boys and girls, then you just can't do a random sample because it may not give you what you want. So you might want 5 boys, 5 girls, something like that, but you've got to do a representative sample. And it says here, when we select a random sample of 80 students from a big school, it could be possible, even though it's probably not likely, that we could get 80 students from one year group and not have any representatives from any other year group. So if it is important that we have what we call a proportional mix of students from each year group, then again, you can't just do a random sample because it may not give you a satisfactory sample group. So what we do is we use what we call a stratified random sample. Let's see how this works. What it says is, in this method, the population is divided into subgroups, which we call a strata. Okay, just smaller groups. And it's based on characteristics such as age, gender, income, and so on. So we've got just broken up groups. The stratified random sample is then made up of random samples from each subgroup. So you take samples from each of these subgroups, and the size of each random sample is proportional to the relative size of the subgroup. Now, what we mean by that is that if you've got a smaller group of older people than younger people, then you'll take fewer out of the older group than the younger group. So you get a proportional pick, but you'll still get some older folk and some younger folk, and therefore a better sample. The example that we're going to use here, though, is one that goes like this. Of the 130 students in Year 7, 70 of them are boys and 60 are girls. We want a stratified random sample based on gender. Okay, so it says what proportion of our sample should be boys and what proportion should be girls. So there you go, we've got 130 students. What proportion should we have in our sample group of boys and what proportion in our sample group of girls? Well, it works out like this, that the number of students to be selected from each subgroup is going to be proportional to the size or the relative size of each subgroup. So we're going to look at a thing like, call this the relative size of a subgroup or a smaller group. So that's the concept. So we would say that 70 out of 130 are boys. Okay, so there's our fraction. We'll write it as we normally see it. 70 out of 130, which is 7 out of 13, which is approximately equal to 53.8%. In fact, it might be exactly, I'm not sure, I can't remember now, but 53.8% about. We should have 53.8% should be boys, should be made up of boys. Now that would be a fair sampling to balance it out. Now, as far as the girls are concerned, we know that 60 out of 130 are girls. All right, so that means that 60 out of 130, which simplifies down to 6 out of 13, or 46.2%. So that does balance out, that and that add up to be 100%. 46.2% should be girls. So the idea would be, if you're going to select a group of students at random, make sure that you get the right proportions that come out of it. So I imagine that if you had, if you wanted a sample of 20 students, then get your calculators out and calculate, let's say, 53.8% of that, and you'll get the number of boys. Now you'll obviously have to round this, but you can work that out. And then 46.2% of the 20 should be girls. And once again, that will be a rounded number. So you try that out and work out what a fair selection would be, making sure that you do round as you need to. And I think you'll find that that would be a good, what we call stratified sample, selected randomly.